So you had some really great points about the worry being to underwhelm the story. I find that very interesting.
Yeah. So basically, Ralph McQuarrie. I was seeing the 4 points, the crucial points. There wasn't anybody at the time who even understood how to do the movie for George than we did. I mean, there just wasn't anybody around that could do that, and
Right?
so we were in the catbird seat, and so that was an important decision that was made. Third was I was always worried because I thought it was a teenage movie until he cast Alec Guinness. And Alec Guinness to me was like the changed the demographic of the movie and made it into a multi-demographic uh, box office. And the fourth was John Williams, the music.
Right.
I mean, I
Again, you
could
big
add
pedigree.
Bill Tippett, and I could add Jen Bird, and I could add some other people, of course. Dennis Muren came in later on, and so anyway, then we were off and running. So John Dykstra and I agreed. I had a meeting with John. It took about half an hour before I was hired. Uh, I met with John and Gary Kurtz one day, and we were on the same wavelength. We both agreed with motion control and the moving camera, and so motion control was a given. And I brought in blue screen because I didn't think any other matting process was going to work for the movie. And so basically, motion control and blue screen were like two of the most important parts of the project to make it work. And
Worked fantastic.
George had a reel that he cut. It was made out of like World War II dogfight footage, like from Battle of Britain and movies like that. And basically, Spitfires and P-51s were like the X-wings and the Y-wings and the TIE ships, and the B-20, B-25, B-26 was the Millennium Falcon,
Wow.
loosely, and so those were kind of like a cutting dynamic that George had in mind for the sequence, and so basically using that and discussions, and I had basically created a 23-inch field for rotoscope because we had these great big roto benches to shoot garbage mats and articulate mats, and I did a 23 field chart, and I had that reduced to fit all the cameras. So all the cameras and the moviola, the 12 field moviola that I made out of a movement from a Technorama camera. So it was all creating stuff from a kind of a big parts bin to
Right.
the technology together. And it was about 9 months before we were ready to actually start shooting. And George was already in England shooting the movie, and it was a trial by fire. I mean, George was diabetic, and so basically he had to keep his blood sugar up, and so there were egg McMuffins and bananas and all that kind of stuff. And the other thing is that the crew on Star Wars initially didn't have much respect for the movie. They thought it was kind of a goofy movie, and they didn't really catch on until about halfway through the shooting schedule that this was going to be something to reckon with. And of course, when George hired Alec Guinness, cast Alec Guinness, that also changed the gestalt of the picture.
That's UK pedigree of the finest order. You mentioned a who's who of budding geniuses that you worked with collaboratively, all of you. It's just incredible. A platform that sprung out from that film and became what it is, and it's obviously
We
beyond
all
film.
seem to magnetize towards each other, and I mean, Phil was a partner of Dennis Murin and Ken Ralston at a commercial company in Hollywood called God, I don't remember. Anyway, I'll remember that. Anyway, they all worked together on the Pillsbury Doughboy and commercials like that. Let Hertz put you in the driver's seat. These kind of early 70s commercials, and so they all came out of this commercial company, and Cascade was the name of the company. Anyway, and John had worked with Dykstra. I mean, John had worked with Trumbull on Silent Running, and I was coming out of Abel's, and I had done early blue screen tests with Joe Westheimer, who was my kind of mentor in the business. He was like an ASC cameraman that specialized in product photography, and he had a company where we did titles and opticals and inserts and special effects for mostly commercials mostly for commercials and TV shows, but we did some for features as well. And basically during that time with Joe, I had a chance to work with a lot of top cinematographers like Ernie Haller, who shot Gone with the Wind, won an Academy Award for it. James Wong Howe, Hal Moore. I can't think of any at the moment. I mean, there are dozens of cameramen that used to come by and shoot, and I was their crew. So I was the grip gaffer, assistant cameraman, operator, stop motion. I was also a title artist. I did main title graphics for Joe. In fact, I even designed the original Star Trek alphabet that they're still using.
Wow. I will tell my dad that when he's a Trekkie.
I got zero extra pay for that. It's great to see it on the screen. They still use the same font.
Man.
But anyhow, so anyway, Star Wars was like a diving board into the future, and I got to thank George for the opportunity.
Right. Well, it's sort of like brilliance begat brilliance, but at the same time you had that osmosis inherently, and it just, it's like, well, I don't want to go on and on about it. It is what it is, and it's fantastic. What a contribution on so many levels. I have another question, and I'm trying to pick questions that you haven't been asked to death, because I'm sure the Star Wars trilogy has covered a lot of ground for you, and it's terrific. I have to ask you this question. My all-time favorite film, Richard, is Fright Night. All-time favorite. Watched it when I was 10. I've watched it probably 100 times. So 1985's horror comedy classic Fright Night is this writer's very favorite film. Your work on the film is both sophisticated and terrifying. Which sequences did you find to be the most technically challenging?
Well, the thing about Fright Night was that after I did Ghostbusters for Gary Martin, who's the president of production over at Columbia, he became a good friend of mine, and because I made him look good, and he said, "You got $5 million to do this movie," and I came in at 5.7. But George, I mean, but Ivan had added like I think he wanted to add 100 shots when we had about 6 weeks left to go, and there was already blood in the shoes and the crew because I mean the lawyers had taken so long to put the deal together between Columbia and MGM because we were doing both of those we were doing 2010 and Ghostbusters, which they were like completely different movies, and they also came out 6 months apart. So there was no box office contention, and so it behooved both studios for us to for them to contribute to rebuilding the studio because my approach to visual effects was completely different than that of Doug Trumbull, and basically I had taken over the studio from Doug. And his approach to effects was not at all like mine. I mean, I'm into compositing and motion control and things like that for the most part. And so when I came into the studio that I'd taken over from Doug, it was like a parts drawer, and I had to rebuild everything. And we had to rebuild. We had to create a composite printer to do all the blue screen work on both 2010 and Ghostbusters, and it was a trial by fire. But anyway, I finished it, and Gary was very happy, and so basically right after Ghostbusters, he said, "Richard," he says, "I want you to do this movie called Fright Night," and he said, "You got $1.5 million to do it, period." And he says, you figure out what it needs to be in order to make it into a vampire picture, and you got $1.5 million to do it. And so if you look at the movie, where there's not that many effect shots, there's some good rubber work because I basically came across Steve Johnson on
Yes, sorry, I interviewed Mr.
Ghostbusters,
Johnson.
and he was running the rubber shop, Rubberhead Johnson. And very talented guy. Gyro Gearlou's character screwing girls on the tables. I mean, it was pretty fanciful time. Anyway, so I had to come up with sort of. I mean, there's what do you have to have in a vampire picture besides Roddy McDowall, who played the foil, right? Who didn't really believe that he was the vampire killer, but he had his TV show, and it turned out, in fact, he was a vampire killer, and so not being able to be seen reflected in a mirror is one thing, okay? So, and there was a precursor to the shot of him of what's his name, Chris Sarandon.
Oh, right. Yep.
Walking past a mirror and not seeing the reflection, and
was this the scene when they were in the house with Evil Ed and Amy?
Yeah, that was a very difficult scene. That was one of our trickiest shots,
Wow.
And Gary Waller was basically the cameraman on that shot. And I mean, what else was really great were the matte paintings, because well, now let me think now. Yeah, I mean, there were great matte paintings by Michelle primarily, and I mean, she was actually Matt Urisich's acolyte, and Matt was our master painter who had done paintings in for Spartacus back in the 60s,
Wow.
and
Yeah.
so he and Michelle outshone Matt finally. I mean, she was actually a much more talented painter than he was, but he was a great guy and a great painter, and did a lot of paintings for us. But in any case, the paintings were important, and also the rubber work was important. And there was one scene where we had to do a transition between Evil Ed as
Yes.
Evil Ed as the guy, and then Evil Ed is the vampire, and who becomes, and uh, and the way I did that was I said, okay, Steve, let's do a 50-50. Okay, so on one side of Evil Ed's face, he's kind of normal Evil Ed, if it could be possibly normal. I mean, he was a pretty crazy guy and great casting. And the other side was a vampire.
Right.
So in order to make this work, when he comes over the baluster and lands on the ground, he hits the lamp, and the lamp is swinging back and forth. And so the key light is kind of keying the scene and then getting dark, and then keying the scene and getting dark. And the whole idea there was that when it swing one way, he turns to the other face in the dark, and then when he comes back, it's Evil Ed, the vampire. And it was a simple shot, but it
Very
was
compelling.
crucial to making the whole movie work. And
Right.
And so, and then of course there was the the whole scene in the basement when the bat gets loose, and Steve had created a great bat, and the bat was like flying around. So some of our effects were physical effects, and a few of them were composites. So, but we did come in at $1.5 million for all the show, and of course Gary was very happy. And the other thing that's interesting about that movie was that it really came about. It was it was released about the same time as Silverado, which was, I mean, John Bailey, my friend John Bailey, shot it. And it was a beautifully shot movie, and it came out, and it got all the first run theaters, and then Fright Night came out on the second run theaters, but it outshone the box office of Silverado, and I think that Fright Night actually did better at the box office than Silverado did, which to the studio's amazement.
It was
And I
a
don't know
real
whatever
sleeper hit.
happened to Tom Holland after that. So I mean, I don't know if he did other movies. I don't remember. I think he did, but probably television. But anyway, he kind of disappeared into the TV cobweb.
I believe Child's Play was his subsequent follow-up, and that was
Very what?
peak Child's Play. I think
Child's
he
Play?
directed that.
Oh, he did.
But then he went into a miniseries with the Langoliers, things like that. But yeah, Fright Night is his
Fright Night was the
quintessential.
crowning achievement, right?
Yes, sir. And it's interesting to me how you manage to utilize the necessity of the practical, and that becomes uh, a springboard to creating the incredible incidentally. And it's just how to fuse those two together.
Right.
That's fascinating, and you've made my childhood complete.
and then our friend Peter Himes came up and he said, Richard says, I'm going to do this low budget movie called Monster Squad.
Yes.
And actually, at that time, my good friend John Fasano, who was a very talented writer, had actually written that script and got ripped off. And I think Shane Black got the credit for the script of Monster Squad, and Fred Decker was the director, but he was on a very short choke chain from Peter Himes.
Right. It was
Peter
in New
Himes.
World Pictures, right?
Sorry,
I think New World Pictures put out the Monster Squad.
Peter.
Oh, sorry. New World Pictures. I think they put out. Did they put out the Monster Squad?
I don't remember.
Or
but I probably Peter probably went over the script and rewrote it, or whatever. I mean, Peter was a pretty good writer, and he was a very talented director visually.
Right.
Unfortunately, 2010 didn't pan out at the box office. It was a really beautiful movie, but it didn't meet the expectations of Frank Yablans and the people at the studio at the time.
Right. Yeah, it's a cult classic though, in fairness, but at the time I'm sure.
But yeah, I mean, but the effects in Monster Squad are really damn good, and
They are,
and outshone the rest of the movie.
yeah. No, and I understand there were some potential licensing issues to not completely replicate, with Universal, but
From Universal,
yeah,
who owned all those monsters. Yeah,
but it was fantastic. The effects, they still hold up today.
yeah.
If I may, sir, I want to find a question that, and I could enjoy talking for hours with you. It's just so interesting to get these answers. It just really enhances the backbone and essence of movies. I have to ask you about Poltergeist. Your work on 1982's horror fantasy Poltergeist. It's a legacy-defining excellence among many, of course, with visually stunning and unsettling otherworldly effects that remain potent to this very day. The spider witch sequence is one of the most haunting things I've ever seen and can give me nightmares. So, how did you cultivate the ethereal imagery, and what sequences are you most proud of?
Well, Poltergeist was to me like the coming of age visually, and I had done the 3 Star Wars movies and actually wound up with Oscars for each one of them. And
Congratulations,
I did Raiders.
well deserved.
And following Raiders, I did Poltergeist, and I was up against Dragon Slayer that year for best visual effects. And Raiders won over Dragon Slayer. But then when I was doing Poltergeist, I was up against E.T., which had enormous box office. And even though I think that Poltergeist was a superior visual effects effort that year, E.T. won the Oscar. But
right. I have to say, I certainly appreciate E.T. and I think it was Carlo doing the effects, but I have to say, in terms of atmosphere, Poltergeist, there's nothing today that I've seen, and
I mean, it was Carlo Rambaldi and Dennis, the classic bicycle across the moon shot, which is kind of ridiculous, but that was the hallmark of the movie. And actually, Steven used that for his logo for a while.
Right. Was there ever a moment, Richard, when you were making Poltergeist and you're fusing these things together, the imagery and the evocative nature of the supernatural, that you started feeling like, wow, this is a little terrifying. This is creating art that's
Well, of
that's
course,
coming to life in creepy
yeah.
ways.
I mean, but the thing is, I mean, the interesting story behind Poltergeist was that when I was doing Raiders, Stephen invited Toby Hooper over to come over to to EMI studio while we're shooting Raiders, and he was parading him around and saying, "Oh, this is going to direct this movie, Poltergeist," and then when it came down to starting to shoot, because I was timing Raiders at MGM while we were starting to shoot Poltergeist, and so I would leave the timing rooms in the morning and come back on the set, and I was on the set for the entire show because of the Directors Guild rattling their sabers. The studios were paranoid about anything getting in the way of finishing the movie, so it was basically jammed into production right away, so it would finish before the Directors Guild would go on strike, if they ever did, which they didn't. But anyway, so anyway, on the first day of production, Toby's like trying to figure out what shot to do for the first, which shot he's going to start with. So he said, "Oh, I think maybe I'll try this over here." And so Matty Leonetti, who was this was like an opportunity for Matt, who was a great TV DP, had the chance to shoot this movie that produced by Steven, right? And so basically, Matty would have the camera over there in like no time at all, and then Toby would go over and talk to the actor about the scene and the motivation and all this stuff. And about maybe 30-40 minutes would go by, and he'd come back and he'd say, "No, I'm not going to start with this. I'm going to start with that shot." And he said, "Well, this was Joe Beth, you know." And so basically, Matty gets over the cameras set up for that shot. And then Toby goes over and starts talking to Joe Beth and Craig again for another half hour, 40 minutes. And he kept doing this. And he couldn't make up his mind which shot to start with. And what you got to understand is that in the movie business, nobody gets paid until the camera turns on the first shot. So the executives are pacing the floor, and it's like all of a sudden it's lunchtime and they haven't turned the camera yet. So they call Steven and says, "Steven, what are we going to do? It's like lunchtime and he hasn't turned the camera yet." And so Steven drops. Steven is prepping ET, right? And so he dropped. Start with this shot, about 10 minutes the version, you know. And from then on, Toby not direct to sit because of the DGA contract. And so for years, Toby would brag about how he did Poltergeist, but if you looked at his next movie, I think it was Life Force, it was like a real snoozer. And you could see, if you watched the first 10-15 minutes of that movie, that Toby could never have directed Poltergeist.
Right.
So unfortunately, Steven should have taken credit for that, but he couldn't. And that's too bad, because it's one of his better movies, I think.
Sure. And Toby, it's almost like he came from guerrilla filmmaking, I don't want to say amateur, but Texas Chainsaw being more of a lo-fi approach, being put into a very high-end studio environment and that
Right.
pressure, sometimes you're just not up to it. Spielberg obviously directed one of my favorite episodes of Columbo, working his way up.
Yeah. So anyway,
Thank
I
you for
mean, some
sharing.
of the most important shots, I mean, to me, there's always like the most important shot in the movie, right? And and to me, the most important shot in the movie was the ghost coming down the stairway.
Yes,
And
Ethereal.
of course, you have the scare of the hands coming out of the TV, and then they're here, the opening. But 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 when you then there was a development of the thing and an introduction of the characters and the family and all that, and the casting was fabulous in that movie. I mean, one of the great things about Steven is casting. He knows how to cast a picture, and so
Absolutely.
basically, when he did the casting, and so anyhow, um, and the other thing is that we didn't have time to design the effects beforehand, so we didn't have any storyboards. So Stephen and I were like figuring out the effect shots as we went along in the movie. And in that show, in that shot, I thought it would be it would really be eerie if the if we had a point source light bulb that came down the stairway that would cast eerie reflections on the wall of the banister, and that would add a significant moment of eeriness, and it made the audience feel that it really worked. And so basically, I had a grip dropping a 5K light bulb on a wire from a green bed up above the set, and he would walk forward and pay out the light bulb on the stairway at the rate that the ghost would come down the stairway. And so I then had to get rid of the bulb, and I had to get rid of the had to get rid of the wire, and then I had to paint the ceiling because there was no ceiling, and so adding those, and then plus the rotoscoping, that's how we fixed the plate. But then to do the ghost herself, we cast in up at ILM in Marin County. There was a girl who was doing Peter Pan on the stage across the bay, and at the Opera House, and so we cast her, and she said, "I just love wire work," and most actors hate it because it's like you're hanging in this very super uncomfortable harness from the hip. Usually, there are picks on the hips, and so basically, uh, and uh, Thane's wife was the costumer, and she created the wedding veil costume, and then we tore a bunch of long shards of material out in front, and basically I shot her looking down this way as opposed to looking up at her. I was using gravity as my friend, and then she fell away from camera, and the camera was a 16 millimeter, 500 frame a second camera. So I'm shooting a 16 millimeter, 500 frames a second to get this thing. And then basically by running it backwards, these shards that were trailing behind are now reaching out in front of you. And so that was basically and there were, I had to build a special optical printer to blow 16 up to VistaVision. And anyway, there were all kinds of things that we did to recreate. Then there was like, let me see. I mean, I could go on and on about poltergeist, and then there was the esophagus. Okay. And the esophagus was this huge maw that was like sucking, and there was like a snake that came out that was going to grab a hold of her and yank her in. And that was all done by the creature shop created the esophagus. And I remember I had gone to the store and I bought one of these light sticks that you used to buy, and you could crack it and then it would mix and then it would give off light, And I thought, great, that would be great. So I had purchasing purchase a gallon a drum full of that stuff, so we could pump it through the veins of the esophagus and add another creepy aspect to it. So there were all these different ideas that came to bear, and it was like I said, it was coming of age. It was not with the Star Wars and as being a fantasy, you can get away with murder. I mean, they're walking around in a spaceship, but Raiders to the same degree, a little bit more, but with Poltergeist, this was happening in your neighbor's house. Right. And so it was like, you could actually think about it as being a house down the street from you. And so it required a grasp of audience reality. In other words, you had to create a ghost that looked like a ghost to the audience. And so that aspect of Poltergeist was important. I mean, I could go on and on. I know you have more questions, but I'm going to run out of time here.
No, and I want to be, you've been so generous.
Milestone movies.
It's a treat for the audience because it's like a slow trickle into a geyser in that film of the paranormal, and it stands up so incredibly well. Just want to find a question about one of the best films of all time in the 80s and probably forever. The Christmas movie. Would you say, I have to ask you this first, do you consider Die Hard to be an action movie or a Christmas movie? The debate rages on the internet.
I mean, it was interesting that it happened at Christmas time, and so a lot of people think of it as a Christmas movie. And it was another movie. It was not a huge budget, that we had, and there are not that many shots. There's maybe 50 or 60 shots in there, but they're pivotal shots, and the thing is, they had to look real, and so so we were able to do that. I mean, we'd shoot the plate on top of the actual building, the Fox Tower, and then then out in Veilleuze, in the desert, that we would shoot the helicopter flying around and then comp that into the shot. So it's all making impossible sandwiches. I mean, so
it's almost like I'm peeking behind the wizard's curtain now, and I'm getting a taste of.
And the thing about that is that when we were doing Star Wars, I know Gary decided that he was going to put the models in the in the lobby. And I thought, what? You're going to do that? You're going to give it away. And it wasn't the case. And in the case of Ghostbusters, I even cut in about 15 or 20 of our composite shots into the Ray Parker song that was running on TV, which made the movie, a must see for anybody who saw that. So again, so you think you're giving it away, but when you put it back in context, you're not. And because the audience is being brought through this dramatic train by the director and the actors. Anyway, that's that's in a nutshell. I'm going to have to beg off at this point.
Yes, sir.
Sorry, we didn't get to all of your 14 questions.
And I apologize. I hope I also
because I enjoy making them.
You've done fantastic, and you'll continue to do so. Thank you for the courtesy of your time. It has been an enormous pleasure, and thank you, Richard.
Pleasure. All right.
All right. Bye now.